And camera. 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon, everybody. Congratulations for making it to the Novice Cup Grand Finals. My name is Gabe. I'll be your chair for today. I'm from DLSU. May I invite my panelists to introduce themselves?
Hi, I'm Luna. I'm one of the panelists for today. My pronouns are she, her. Better to refer to as panel. Good luck to all debaters on the round.
Hi, CJ. No preference for pronouns. All the best for teams.
Hi, Sudiksha. She, her pronouns. Good luck.
Yeah, hi, I'm Kugan. Good luck on making it this far. Good luck to the upcoming round.
Right. Thank you so much for that. Before we start, can I ask one of my panelists to send timestamps in the chat, if that's okay? Is anyone available to do so? Also, let me check on my phone as battery because I might be able to do it. Okay. I think my phone is charged, so I'll just be the one to send timestamps. Timestamps will be sent on the 1st minute, the 6th minute, and as well as the 7/15th minute if you reach that point. Housekeeping rules. Firstly, if you're comfortable, please feel free to share your preferred gender pronouns before the start of your speech. Secondly, please state your preferred POI methods, whether it be through chat or voice. What else? Please respect the rules of equity, no badgering. And before we start, can I ask everybody to send their speaker positions in the chat so that and fill up again, yeah, for convenience for all the judges. And with that, I think we're ready to start. Calling on the Honorable Prime Minister. You may start. Here.
Hello, am I audible? Hello, am I audible? Hello.
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah, you're audible and visible.
Sorry. POI is verbal, pronouns he, him. Since I'm PMing for a grand final, I think it's like tradition for everyone to always say a little speech. I want to just thank Tate a great deal because he stuck with me for this tournament, even though I'm like incredibly depressed that I just broke up with my girl. Anyway, I'll try to take a POI at 3 and 5 minutes. I'll stop and ask for one. If I forget, feel free to interrupt me. And yeah, beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. Instead of destroying meaningless menial work with AI, we have all decided as a society to attack one of the few remaining means of creative expression, a way, all in the name of capitalism. We want to posit to you a couple of arguments. First, we want to argue that the reason why this is important is to protect writers' abilities to negotiate within the future. Second, why this is inherently exploitative of art and ruins and is principally wrong. Third, why it's principally wrong in terms of plagiarism. First, on leverage. Understand that AI art, generative AI is currently unable to generate writing scripts to the same level as current writers as of now. However, this can still change in the future insofar as you allow them to train off specific writers. When you have a certain style as a writer, think of like Wes Anderson or whatever, there's a specific way, a specific troping, specific kind of narrative that they usually employ within their movies that can still be replicated given enough practice. This is the current delta that we have in our world when we're allowing no access to these generative AI to actually base off and basically plagiarize and copy these word for word. No, why is this important? Understand that the current deal with the writer's strike movement is not permanent. It is up for revisement in 3 years' time. It's specifically written there. The reason why this was done is because they want to try to train AI in order to see if they can actually have more leverage in the future. Currently, the big studios understand that if they try to go without writers and rely only on AI, they'll get screwed. They don't make good movies. That's why they want to try to leverage them out by actually producing good AI that can replace writers en masse and remove them completely. Why is it likely that this AI training could lead to this? Understand that a lot of storytelling is based on tropes and standardized storytelling, right? Campbellian storytelling. Even plot twists are generated in such a way that they think about readers' expectations before subverting them in a multitude of ways, yes, but in a limited amount of ways. After all, there are only so many different tropes you could run. Even if there is like incredible creativity within these individuals, here's why it's still going to happen in our second layer, right? Understand that you will own this disproportionately harms smaller writers from coming in. Those that are already creative and have like a name for themselves and are reputable as writers are the only ones that are going to be able to succeed within a status quo where AI has managed to replace writers completely, right? Because these smaller creators have less leverage. They don't have as much clout. They have no inherent reason or like foundations within these industries to like stay in there when they have when industries are able to like shift it over to like much cheaper AI work. Understand that this is especially true when you have like scene generations, which might not necessarily be incredibly important to the plot, but are just generally there, right? Like writing jokes or like writing a scene by scene analysis, right? Instead of having 20 writers employed, you can employ much less. Understand that it's harmful because these writers are inherently vulnerable within society. They have been trained for this their entire lives. It's likely their passion. So even if they could transition to other jobs, we think that it's unfair for them to be forced out of their passion because it's what they trained for, right? And we think that they're significantly more vulnerable than the consumers that might get better art or better movies as a result of letting AI take over, right? Now, the opportunity, moving on to my next argument, is what it actually means for art to create these stories. And think of what it means. Think of like heartfelt stories that detail emotions or struggles of like minority groups or like disadvantaged individuals. What happens when instead of it being created by an actual person with lived experiences of that story who actually went through that experience, now it's just created by a cold heart robot? First off, on a principle level, that's clearly exploitative of other people's suffering, other people's like actual pain in order to generate views. Second, it removes these individuals' ability to represent their own causes. So, for instance, if they if a lot of good Black if a lot of good civil rights movements were made by like a couple movies, couple books that managed to like push this idea, showcase this, it's much harder for these people to be representative when they might just also be competing with AI. Before 6 POI.
Yeah, what's stopping anyone from just training their own AI model or corporations just training their own AI model by buying a Wes Anderson movie and just feeding it that? You doing this to Hollywood doesn't stop the broader trend of AI development everywhere else in the world.
There's still large access of like copyright material. We can still even if you do argue that some level of this happens to some degree, we think it also applies to like hidden scripts. It applies to every manuscript. Everything that's been scrapped or like redone, reshot, not everything is up for public domain, right? Understand when this is true, then you have an ability to actually stop people from from creating this on their own as well. Understand we're also unclear why we can't extend the model to also include any sort of like why we can't extend that to even like the smaller individuals. Why can't we create generative AI that can recognize when it's being fed other people's scripts and make sure that it's not allowed to do that through like legislation or some form of like police enforcement, right? Unclear. Next, to complete my exploitation thing, it's just a it's a principle of honesty. If the professor thinks that his wife, kids, and students all love him, but in reality they're all lying to him, we think it's inherently wrong to do so because you have to be honest with your individuals. The very last thing I want to push here is this idea on plagiarism, right? First, you never are able to like actually compensate these writers for their work. If this AI could have never generated this art without the bundle of work that it was trained on. We think that the writer should be compensated for that, but they will be unlikely to be compensated for that in the long term. Maybe in the short term, they'll be given like 100,000 or something. But if it creates like lots of money in the future, it's really unclear why studios will be incentivized to provide accruals in the future, even given that they don't already provide that in the first place. I think I'm out over time. Understand that even in of itself, it's unfair to plagiarize other individuals' work and try to pass it off as your own. We think it's, for all these reasons, OG.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for the speech calling on the Leader of Opposition. Here.
Can I check that I'm clearly audible?
Yep.
Okay. I'll just get my timer up. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Opening government's case has the incredibly large logical gap of proving why these AI are likely to replace artists if, by their own mechanization, people read books for the emotion and people want the emotion of human authors and human artists. I'm going to prove 3 things in this speech. First thing, on why there is an enormous opportunity cost. Secondly, on why this is actually better for writers and artists in the long term. And thirdly, why we get more art and better art. Firstly, though, one extraneous piece of rebuttal in terms of the plagiarism point and intellectual property point that opposition bench run. Note that it is incredibly unclear why training off of artists' work means that you are violating the intellectual property. It means that you are, for example, plagiarizing, especially when you are not copying line by line. You're presumably learning the types of things and the ways in which people express things and the types of things that people actually express. And this is especially true at the point at which you presumably take many artists and many composers' works rather than a single one. So therefore, it is like a side opening government has an incredibly high burden to prove that this is actually plagiarism and things like that, right? I'd like to note that also humans similarly take ideas from many people. Like when you're a child, you take ideas from all the authors that you read. It is unclear why it is not the property of, for example, the robot or the AI rather than the actual authors themselves. Thus, it is incredibly unclear why this principal point stands. The rest of the rebuttal will be integrated. First point then on opportunity cost. The first thing I'd like to note is that generative AI right now is not good enough to replace artists. This is something which OG concedes. Secondly, therefore, if this provision does not exist, there is thus capital to be utilized for other provisions or further bargaining, right? So therefore, if we prove that generative AI will not replace them or will not be enough of a threat, the more proximate and less speculative benefits like that could have been put in instead of this provision is actually what wins us this debate. I think this looks like things such as like just higher wages, for example, right? Further protections from being rendered redundant, like working conditions, or even just like remuneration for your work base being used to train AI models, right? I think that like OO mentioned this as a thing that is unlikely on our side, but I think we can use the exact capital that they use to completely ban it, then rather to say that like, oh, if you want to use my work, I will pay you for it, right? And things like that. I think this is much more beneficial for artists insofar as it is incredibly speculative whether AI will actually replace artists in the first place. And also, I'd like to note that it is incredibly concessionary from OG to say that, like, this is something that can be rehashed in 3 years. Like, sure, this concedes that this is something which is not perfect and needs to be debated. Like, this is what we're debating, whether this needs to be reconsidered or whether this is a good or bad thing that does indeed need to be changed in a couple years' time. At the end of this point, note that the opportunity cost and what we give in terms of the potential other provisions to these artists is the most proximate benefit to these people. It is not completely speculative and it is not so far into the future that you cannot weigh this properly. Weigh this highly, panel. Second point then on why this is likely better, why this is actually better for writers and artists in the long term. 2 cases I'd like to talk about here. Firstly, I think it's just very likely that people will still consume the work of artists and writers, right? Because people do not consume art for perfection, which is why like I forgot what photorealism isn't the most popular form of art around. They consume it for the experience, the experiences that the artists have, for the humanity, for the emotion, which OG themselves concede in the entirety of their case. What this means is that people will still consume the work of artists and writers insofar as robots cannot have like their own lived experiences that can be represented through text, right? People seek this human connection, right? They seek the experiences that are being put down on a page and not simply regurgitated from an online source. People want to read people's work rather than robots, right? If someone really likes Stephen King, they will look for a Stephen King book rather than a Stephen King emulated book by a robot, because they do not perceive this as something which is still the same. You do not have the experience of the author. You do not write in the same way as the author. People will still go to these authors. But like, even if we take opening government at their best,
POIOG.
claim that in a bit, and claim that in the future AI will take over, right? Like, AI will probably get to a point where they can replace writers in either world, because this is something on their side which is not unique, right? If this mechanism stands, I think it is just as likely that AI without these writers will simply do the same thing and get to a point where they are good enough to surpass artists, or that it is a norm that AI art exists, right? Because I think that in our POI, we claim that like it is incredibly hard to enforce. Like, a lot of people could probably just sneakily put in copyrighted works and things like that. And also the public domain is probably enough to make AI good if OG wants to claim that AI will take over art, right? So it is incredibly unclear why this branch of people having their art being used as generative material actually is the tipping point for these AI art actually becoming good in the first place. Because use your imagination here, right? Like, the power of computers is incredibly strong. A couple decades ago, people never thought that a computer would be able to beat a human in chess, but now they are much stronger and completely dominant. This is something which like can happen in either world and not unique to OG. And in this world, it is even better for our side, right? Because note the remuneration and other profits, which are remuneration things which we are able to give to artists, right? Why is that opposition better off here? We give artists better time. Firstly, we give artists more time to adapt in our world, whereas it is more likely to be a jarring change in theirs, right? Like, secondly, artists at least get credit. Note that this is like very difficult to enforce. And at the point at which this is true, on our side, at least we can say that this AI was trained off of these artists. So these artists still get some credit for what they have done. They might get remuneration for what they have done and things like that. Before I go on to my next point, I'll take a POI from closing. Opening. No engagement.
What's stopping industries from making plants that look like real people but are actually generated by AI?
I'm unclear as to why this is beneficial for your side, because if they can do this, like, if they can do, oh yeah, sorry, I get your point now. But the difference is like sure, this happens, but people, they don't have the name, right? It's still a robot. You don't have the name. People, and the example that I gave, they don't go to a bookstore to buy a book from robot Stephen King. They go to buy a book from actual Stephen King, because this is an author they love, an author they are used to, and an author that has historically been good. Okay, second point, last point on why we get more art and better art. The characterization here is that unfortunately artists and composers aren't immortal. At the point at which they pass away, it is better that artists are especially able to use this thing, AI is like to use these things and replicate these experiences, right? Art encompasses not only paintings, but text and like animations and all of these things. Art is a representation of human history and human development itself, right? It's a reflection of history, and AI in the future is able to be beneficial if it is made from these artists. The mechanisms here are clear. Firstly, they learn and adapt from what makes art so connected with individuals. Secondly, current artists are likely able to increase the quality of the art if they perceive it as perhaps competition, right? If they do not want AI to like take over them, they are more likely to also improve the quality of their art, which means we get benefits to art on two metrics. Firstly, in terms of AI in the future, but secondly, in terms of current artists. The impacts here are not small, right? People gain a lot of things from art, things like emotional catharsis, things like being able to get taken out of a slump because they read a really good book that can like actually revitalize them due to the human connection, the ability to connect to like certain experiences of other people. I think this is a benefit that cannot go unsaid. For all these reasons,
I'd like to thank the sorry. I'd like to thank the leader of opposition for that speech, calling on the deputy prime minister. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep.
Okay. I'm Tate. I've got no pronoun preference. POIs, please verbally. I'd like you to unmute so I can hear your wonderful voice. Also, before I start, I'd also like to thank Aaron right back. Like, he's just been an amazing, wonderful partner to me. He's carried me through prep like throughout this entire tournament. Would not like imagine a better partner to have. So this one goes out to mom and dad and Tate on Gift, Ibrahim, Sumit, Pacha, and Sam. Time will start at my first word. When I was a child, I actually wanted to be a writer, write a little story here and there, maybe even make a name for myself. Opening opposition says that writers are going to be benefited like right now in the current state. However, I urge you to think of the future. What do we hear from Aaron? We hear this point about overcrowding, this idea that like AI is likely going to be able to proliferate and expand to the point at which it can take over different like artists in the world. What this writer strike is doing is trying to slow down the tide and try to beat back against it. What do we hear from opening opposition? They say that there's an unfulfilled burden that AI can replace artists, and like you could have gotten concessions elsewhere. But I think that this is a grave strategic error to make, because there's this large Pascal's wager that you're completely betting on, which is that there's in no estimation, no capacity, any way for AI to overtake these artists in your world. What we're saying here is like, even if like there's a reasonable chance, which I'm going to prove to you later in this speech, like by all means, we should stand against this strike, if anything, for a measure of preemptive safety. Note that by your own estimation, like if this truly isn't like a consequential thing to be cared about, we think that this doesn't actually like gain much political capital anyway, if it's something that these like counter lobbyists can just tack on at the end of this. I think that opening opposition underestimates the true generative power of AI. In that, how does it work? AI takes in content, reads it out, and explains the next thing that is most likely to come out. They brought up chess, but then afterwards there was Go, a game of like immense complexity in comparison to chess. And then ChatGPT came along, these advances that came at a startling rate, unprecedented in all of human history. I want you to trust, like just as a human being, like empirically looking at this, even if it's not great now, it will be in the future. And no team, not opening opposition, not closing up, or anyone can say for certainty that it isn't. But note that even if quality doesn't go up, like it will continue, the existence of AI itself continues to crowd out artists and will only get better at doing so on our side of the world. What we do is comparatively try to like lower that comparative advantage on our side and say that, hey, maybe there is something worthwhile to going to writing school. Maybe there is something worthwhile in spending hours like at night studying like the greats, or like just looking at consuming media and trying to hone it for yourself. This is exactly what the motion changes. Because when you are able to copy the exact nuance of people's styles, like it just doesn't happen organically. We think Aaron tells you that this is exploitative of the suffering that you pour your heart and soul into your art and sends it off to be manufactured and reproduced in like imperfect ways. Note that the worse that AI is, like it just like continues to do this more and more. And like when leaks happen, like when something is like directly plagiarized, I think it's very unlikely that an author is going to get credited, but instead is just going to like appear or like be done with as little grace as possible, like in the worst possible outcomes. Oh, can't hedge against this. Any POIs?
Yeah, sure. What is the purpose of art and who is art actually for?
All right, that's my extension. But first, I'm going to talk about it. Why should writers be in the field, given that there's this massive risk of like economic like advantages of AI being placed over these human artists? We think that the capacity for you to be able to make a living doing art is something that drives people in order to create it. Why do artists make art? What? Because I don't think, and this is something that we brought from Aaron, it isn't simply humble self-expression as like OO talks about, but like a multitude of other things, in part because you want to make a living, because it's like something that you're naturally good at, or maybe you want to like have glory. Whatever the purpose is, it doesn't matter. It's an incentive to do things and to learn about the world. So when OO says that people do it for humanity and brand recognition, that brand recognition is exactly why it's more difficult for artists to break into like this industry. If I show you an essay written by a person and by ChatGPT, I dare LO or anyone in this room to tell the difference. This is why like colleges can't use anti-ChatGPT like essay writers, because they're so darn similar over here. So you say that this change will be more jarring on our side when we're the ones actually slowing it down with this progress. OO says that artists are going to get no credit or no remuneration when all this emotion is going to be co-opted and used like without your consent, without any accreditation. Like when you open up like this AI, you're not going to get it. What does this mean? It means that any young child who wants to study their art and publish their skills, from the grizzled novelist who went to school for a bunch of years to any kid who wants to post their Harry Potter fan fiction on the internet, is too damn easy to just let an AI do it. Corporations know it, and you know it too. So every time that Aaron talks about writers being crowded out, note This means viscerally that years of training is going down the drain. Note, this delta also affects the people who devote the most amount of time writing, the people that can't be replaced currently in the status quo, but will be later. The most well-known and nuanced and polished people with their style who like go to books and like are great at just crafting amazing stories are the ones that are most susceptible to this and most susceptible to this rise. And note, like we don't actually need to solve the problem to do this, because the perception of this, like the perception of being pro AI and having this to be a good thing, like for artists, is what also like just tears people off or turns people off in terms of this narrative, which is why we uniquely fix this problem by attacking the perception itself. My final piece, okay, on art and like the principle, why we want to look to the future. Note that like any child that grows up in this new world where AI is normalized as just the thing that you go to write isn't something that they're going to be doing themselves, because like current generations and future generations are going to modulate and they're going to normalize this thing and just take it apart in your cultural lexicon. This is why we need to stand against this. Note that art is just simply one of the bastions of humanity. Homo ludens, man, humans who play and tell stories where like the rising like ape can meet the falling angel. So no, even if this ban doesn't do a damn thing, it is good to stand in support of the uniqueness of humans and our experiences, the hopes and dreams that we pour our soul into. This helps our perception. This gives us hope. Like any damn thing that in the face of capitalism or the face of stress or like mental health pressures, anything that can make people smile. The real absolute most visceral reason why you should support this motion in the real world is because people like me open my newsfeed and smile when I see this. So yes, CEO, it could be low impact. This ban could do absolutely nothing practically. We could just be wasting away. But what we're going to be doing is, again, beating back the tide. Note that this is very popular in that like bolstering the hearts and minds of people also translates back to the Writers Association in that it's popular. For every child that wants to read and write and grow as an individual who hopes of like making their mark on the world, I urge you, stand in open in government.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech, calling on the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
All right, I'm audible.
Yep.
Right. Okay. The EPM says that art gives us hope and it is good to support art created by humans. My question to OG is, why can't art created by AI do the exact same thing? Because as David told you, AI can actually improve art. It can actually increase the access to art by making it cheaper. And I think that like what OG failed to do was create a meaningful distinction between AI collectivizing like sort of like, you know, a certain person's lived experiences and just replicating that kind of lived experience in the same way any other human does through their own synthetic process, and art that is created by humans. They haven't given that us that distinguishing factor. And for that reason, I think also empirically, there is AI art that gives people hope and gives people aesthetic, like, and produces aesthetic beauty that gives people satisfaction and entertainment. I think AI is capable of doing things in the future, like creating scripts and for movies and for TV shows that give people genuine entertainment and genuine hope. And we think at the point at which AI can do that in a better way, I think it is. I think we should support this. Also, they said beating back the tide is worth it in and of itself. I think also, I think that is contingent on you actually being successfully being able to beat back the tide. And at the point at which artists and producers are actively harmed by having less time to adapt to AI and having less time to actually work with AI in a complementary sense, I think that is actively bad for writers and producers. A couple things in this speech. I'll start with the principle, because I think that that's just a wash that can be easily thrown out of this debate. They said that you can't compensate writers enough and it's unfair to plagiarize. Firstly, I think our canon model deals with this sufficiently, because we think that presumably if you can do things like make sure that artists and writers can't have their work stolen by AI and plagiarized, you can also do things like compensate them and with remuneration that is sufficient. That's to say the political capital and like leveraging power that is needed to ban AI is obviously much more than just compensating workers writers fairly. So I think canon model deals with that. Secondly, as David pointed out, this AI isn't actually copying artists artist line by line. It's just synthesizing a bunch of information as any other human does. As much as humans are influenced by other people, I think AI is also influenced by those works. Unclear as to why plagiarization. Also a note on stakeholders, right? If this AI is likely to plagiarize so-called artists that are very reputable and artists that are very very wealthy already and sort of well established in the industry, at that point it's unclear as to why it's unclear the impact as to how much money you're stealing off these artists, because these artists are already wealthy, that they're probably the most reputable in the industry. It's unclear why those artists need to be protected so much. Unclear why that principle actually stands in this page. Then I'll talk about writers and producers because they try to stake their claim here. We told you at OO that all the political capital used to do things like stop AI being trained on writers and producers' work will now be going to much more concrete and much more actual helpful things for writers and producers. Things like remuneration, things like working conditions. This looks like the poor writer who literally can't make a living, actually being compensated fairly for their work. And just a note on weighing here, because I think this is our first and most immediate path to victory. I think this is the most proximate benefit because it is immediate as opposed to the speculative, AI will never replace the work of humans. This ban will be totally effective, right? Because I think there's a very large chance this ban won't be effective. As they say, in 3 years, this will be revised. I think as I'll later explain on, this AI tide is probably inevitable. So I think this is the most immediate benefit, and it's also a pretty large benefit because it means workers, it means writers who have traditionally been underrepresented and writers who have traditionally been underpaid actually receiving fair compensation for their work. It means their families can be fed, etc. What did they say about writers and producers? They said that pretty much not you're protecting a writer's ability to negotiate, because right now AI can't replace writers' work, and now and allowing this provision to not go through will mean that AI will become good enough to replace them. Firstly, we deny this, as David said, because we think that AI will never replace certain expressions of creativity and humanity, because by their own mechanization, humans care about lived experiences, and more than that, they care about the connection to the actual artist and the actual writer. That's to say, companies can't just make up this imaginary AI and just pass them off as a person, because people just immediately call bullshit, right? If they can't see that writer, they can't see the person who created their beloved story, right? So it's not just the work of art itself, it's the actual work, it's the actual person behind that art that people care about. And secondly, we think that AI will always be one step behind, in a sense. No, because we think that also AI is trained on things that are originally that are already produced. People can come up with new things and new creative endeavors, and we think that AI can never do this because it is always using past sort of works. Secondly, we flip the claim on smaller writers being abused right now because we think that there's a certain stagnancy in Hollywood, right? Reputable artists are too comfortable training at the same formulaic content, and we think the presence of AI, as David told you, will encourage more creative and more sort of unique processes of art making. That's to say, it actually benefits small artists who haven't had their work known in the public sphere, because it means that they're creative and novel ideas that haven't been previously recognized, because big Hollywood machines and big producers were just comfortable using the same formulaic Marvel movies or whatever. Those artists will actually be given priority because they are the only thing that AI cannot copy, because those are the only artists whose work is not trained on the generative AI yet, who actually are good for smaller writers because they're the only ones who are creative and who exist sort of outside of the Hollywood machine. Thirdly, I don't necessarily think that artists will be forced out, and these are really vulnerable actors. The reason for this is because it is only on our side that we give artists the time to adapt to this certain change and this sort of time to do things that consider alternative career paths instead of the jarring change that will inevitably come along. While this jarring change inevitably come along, this is because we think that this provision will be repealed and destroyed as OG concede themselves. Firstly, AI will eventually get good enough to actually replace writers in many circumstances. Note that we can do this because AI development and training will happen in either world. That's to say, piracy is rampant, the internet is virtually impossible to regulate, and people will just feed AI models just like will feed AI models just like the works of artists in their own way, right? Secondly, this enormous economic and consumer pressure to make art better and cheaper, which means that at the point at which AI can make art that is cheaper and by their own concession, because generative AI is so powerful, we think that eventually corporations will just succeed to this pressure and just mean that they'll just replace this provision. Thirdly, what's to say that coders and developers over at OpenAI can't find ways to create AI that just beats the system and just replicates the human endeavor of creativity? I think it is very possible that AI will just eventually come along that doesn't even need generative training, right? Fourthly, by their own concession, this is only a temporary provision. That's to say, this is going to get reviewed in 3 years, maybe even sooner. And even if there's just a certain even small chance that these writers 3 years later don't have enough leverage, this provision will be destroyed. And at that point, the change will be so much jarring, because at that point, AI will become so much more developed and writers have less chance to, actually adapt. What does this mean? We think that this means that this provision is inevitably is delaying the inevitable, right? And crucially, it denies workers and artists the opportunity to embrace the AI revolution and find ways to work with AI as a complement to the efforts. Observe that the context here is crucial, right? Because as considered, AI is not good enough right now to replace artists. That's why these artists have the time to work with and adapt to AI and come up with the ways that they can still be relevant while still having AI around, right? That's to say, we think that artists can far more easily adapt to AI and work with AI in a positive sense, in a way that can preserve their job rather than just doing this, right? We think that this is another path to victory. It's just like our claims about how there's more and better art, because we think that generative AI is actually really helpful, as I flagged in my introduction, in connecting to people meaningfully and creating good and cheap art. For those reasons, I think just based on number and vulnerability of this enormous amount of people who consume art on a daily basis, I think this is another path to victory that can win us the debate in its own right. For those reasons alone.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for the speech, calling on the Member of Government. Here.
And can I just check that I'm audible?
Yep.
Okay. If I cut off at any point, please prompt me verbally. And if there are any POIs, I'd like it to be flagged out verbally. I won't be checking the chat. Okay, so okay. That being said, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. We acknowledge that as a whole, AI offers value and has certain benefits, but we want to say that it threatens the livelihoods of writers, and this is not a trade-off that our side is willing to take. Our burden of proof is to say that we on Closing Government want to protect creators and writers, and we believe that prohibiting the training of generative AI does this best. So this is where the first extension comes in, which is that we provide better protection for writers. Why is this true? Firstly, we must understand why the strike in Hollywood took place in the first place, because writers already felt undervalued and underappreciated. Even if their works were box office hits, they were paid measly crumbs or barely getting any recognition. The use of AI will only exacerbate this problem because it further threatens their compensation, and it is the first step that is taken on a pathway that completely replaces the writers as a whole. So why is this bad? Even if the use of AI just starts off as a tool, it leads to dependency in the long run. The same way ChatGPT is not just a reference tool anymore, right? People are using it to write their whole essays in school. In fact, even in ChatGPT, it uses content and material by writers against their consent. Even when ChatGPT gives you answers to questions you ask, they don't actually cite where that source is coming from, right? No credit is given to the actual writers, and we believe that this is exactly what's going to happen if opposition's world is put into favor. So why is this important? Because then no credibility is given to those who deserve it. Writers are the heart and soul that go behind the creation of all the shows and movies we love so much. They take pride in their work, which is a product of hours and hours of sitting in a room, putting something good together, feeling happy and satisfied, knowing they've just made something that they hope a large audience will love to see. They deserve this credit. It is morally right to give them the credit where credit is due. In opposition's world, there will definitely lead to a loss of jobs, because we already told you why. If AI starts off as a tool, we already see so many real world examples where AI replaces humans, right? So opposition says that on their side, writers will be compensated better, but I don't understand why this is true, because if AI is starting to do majority of the work, why would writers be paid anything more than just pennies? If anything, writers being underpaid is exacerbated so much more on your side, because now they don't even need them anymore, right? Once enough content has been inputted into the AI software, the AI starts doing everything. So if anything, you'll be starving new and upcoming artists in your world because there's no use for them anymore. AI has enough material to go on to just generate their own scripts from artists of the past, right? There's no need to take in any more new writers, and this is bad because it is already so hard for up and coming artists to break into a very saturated market in Hollywood, and your side basically makes this endeavor impossible. So this is not something we want to support. We want to protect the livelihood of writers, and we believe that they deserve this protection. So this is where the second extension comes in, which is firstly that we want to protect authenticity of content in Hollywood. So why is it true that why is it true that we protect the authenticity of content in Hollywood? Because just based on the very way AI works, right, is that you feed they feed off inputted like content that is inserted into their system. Then they take that content and they take that information and then they generate very similar types of content. So why is this bad? Because now there will barely be any diversity of content in Hollywood. Cheap AI generated films will saturate the market, and this is not something we want. So why is authentic content important? Because now because like movies and shows on Netflix are things that people hold very dear to them, right? Sitting on your couch after a long day and watching your favorite show is a form of escapism and a source of happiness for many of us. We like to identify with the characters. We like to find solace and comfort in these storylines. It is all in all a positive experience that society as a whole takes pleasure in. We like knowing that real people wrote this content that we can identify with, and we seek this out by like watching videos on YouTube of writers like talking about the creative process that went into creating this piece of art, right? We like hearing them talk about their own personal experiences that gave them inspiration to like write this film. For example, many young women love Greta Gerwig films because her content centers around themes of girlhood and youth that many young girls can identify with. And we love seeing her interviews online where she talks about this and where she talks about her own experiences that went into creating this piece of art. We feel inspired seeing a female writer in Hollywood doing so well and her work actually being put onto the big screen. And like that work showcases like her own experiences that we can identify with. And she's actually using her work to draw attention to female issues in society. We love seeing this happen. We see like Jordan Peele, an African American screenwriter who includes themes of the Black experience in his work, and we love seeing him talk about his work like that we love so much. And Black people feel represented in his films. And an integral part of feeling seen and feeling represented is knowing that a fellow Black man with similar experiences and troubles that struggles that you have faced took those experiences and turned it into such beautiful content. Sure.
Both of your points, both of your extensions are premised under the assumption that the AI revolution isn't inevitable. Under our side, artists have time to adapt and find ways to make themselves relevant precisely because AI isn't good enough to replace them. In your world, when the Hollywood elites just one day decide to scrap the provision, AI will be much more developed and so many more artists are going to be screwed over because of that.
No, we do not think that the AI takeover is inevitable, but that's exactly what our side is trying to fight against. Your side is just saying, okay, yeah, we are going to, like, if anything, give it a platform to happen. We do not want this to happen. We don't want AI to take over. We don't think it's an integral thing that's going to happen because we are giving you all these reasons as to why humans prioritize human experiences and like true human creativity. So yeah, back to what I was saying, right? Yeah, so Jordan Peele, like Black people feel represented in his films, and an integral part of feeling seen and represented is knowing that a fellow Black man with similar experiences and struggles that you have faced took those experiences and turned it into such beautiful content. On the flip side, just knowing that a story was written by like an AI model just takes away the humanitarian aspect that causes us to identify and love film so much, right? There's nothing inspiring, there's nothing beautiful about knowing a computer put together some data and produce a string of words for a script. But there is something beautiful and there is something inspiring about real human experiences written by real humans. So that being said, why do we weigh out against our opening? So opening government like mentioned how plagiarism is bad, but they give no further real analysis to this. We fill in the gaps here. We paint a picture as to why it is morally important that we give credit to where credit is due to these writers who are putting in so much hard work into creating content that all of us love, right? We tell you why it is so important that we get a human touch in Hollywood where true experiences are shown by true like writers that we can identify with, and we tell you why society wants this. Society wants writers to remain human and not computers. We want to see our experiences shown through like we want to see our experiences shown in a more humanitarian aspect way. There's nothing beautiful about a computer writing a script. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the member of government for the speech, calling on the member of opposition. Here.
Cool, am I audible?
Yep.
Sick. Yeah, just give me a sec. Starting in 3, 2, When the Industrial Revolution occurred, farmers and sow's dreams claimed that they would be replaced, and they claimed that this would be unjust. But clearly, this was an event that we don't think is regrettable, because it meant that for so many other people on the ground, the world became a far better place for them to live in. It improved society as a whole on a scale that was unimaginable. We think this is a principal extension of that, because the development of tools that benefit society at large wasn't something that was regrettable. It was something that was good. It was something that improved the lives of so many people on the ground. That is the extension that we bring to you at closing opposition. Because obviously, the thing to point out here is that people just unfortunately are not entitled to jobs as everyone else claims. People don't deserve compensation. Well, they do deserve compensation, but they don't deserve to be employed, or they don't have like an obligation to be employed at a specific field. Obviously, this was something that had to be principally proven. We don't think this was sufficiently done by either government bench. But even so, just a bit of responses as to whether or not people will be completely replaced. In status quo, we just don't think that's true. 3 quick reasons why. First, people care about the style of artists to the point in which you have your individual voice that closing government claims. Unclear why it would be replaced. But the second reason why is because of the mechanisms that OG provide. Because if they explain to you that minorities are going to be exploited, obviously this exploitation was contingent upon proving that people cared about this work in the first place. People cared about seeing minority stories. This was obviously something that you couldn't create with a robot that was not did not have human experiences. Like, you can have a human, like a robot AI going like just like producing the story, but if it isn't tied to any direct human experiences, unclear why this would be something that actively replace someone like Jordan Peele. But the third reason here is just because people care about supporting other humans. People care about seeing their names on credits. People care about seeing human authors on book spines. Obviously, people weren't going to replace en masse like both government benches claim. That takes out both government benches. The extension then takes us over opening opposition. We just claim to you that you are able to democratize writing. You're able to improve people's expression of their own well-being and their expression of their own lived experiences. And this is something like everyone on the ground and not just the writers that GovBench wanted to talk about. 3 things here to explain. First, there are just very structural barriers for you to self-expression, to do things like writings, to do things like producing films, to do things like copywriting. 2 reasons why. First, there was just a structural inaccessibility to things like training. Writing at its highest level requires you to use very, very complex techniques. Things like expressing the human emotion, things like expressing the human conditions, things like being able to effectively express narrative plot lines that require you to have an immense understanding of how writing works at an operative level, require you to do things like taking writing classes or to be able to mentor other individuals that have gone through these experiences. Obviously inaccessible for a lot of individuals on the ground, which explains to you why the minority writers under their side were individuals that we don't really, that we are willing to trade off, and we're willing to trade off for individuals that did not have access to being able to like opt into the writer profession in the first place, right? Because no, people have stories that they want to tell, but can't tell them effectively because they can't meaningfully express themselves to the full range of human emotion that great writing does in status quo. Obviously, this was something that made individuals difficult to express themselves. But the second reason why people just can't express themselves very meaningfully is because there are just unfortunately very many individuals who suffer neuroatypical thought processes, people who might struggle to understand things like empathy or how to emotionally connect with individuals or how to internalize and internally understand what they're going through and understand how they're feeling. These are all very complicated things for not only the average person to do, but for most individuals who might suffer a mental illness, for example, people who might have autism and suffer from an inability of expressing human emotions, obviously suffer from being able to produce great works like GovBench wants to claim, but also people just might have things like dyslexia and use generative AI to do things like streamline copywriting. These are obviously very structural barriers that mean that most people on the ground can't access self-expression in the way government bench claims. The
POI?
Here. It's just generative AI becomes far better in a world where you feed specifically writing and produces works. And the note here is just to explain how AI actually works, because no other team does this. AI works predictively in that it works off a set of databases and it looks at what word was most likely to come next in a series of a sentence, right? Which means to say, in a world where you better feed great work as they claim into the data set, you had a greater likelihood of producing works that were far more expressive of the human emotion, far more expressive of the great works that we see and status quo. Obviously, the outcome of this was that AI in general just became far better at doing things like expressing human emotion and be able to do things like expressing the human experience that GovBench wants to claim was something that was so good. Obviously, this was something that was far better in a world where artificial intelligence was able to do things like replicate the human spirit and the human emotions. The outcome here is fairly simple. One, you just improve the capacity for individuals to be able to use this as a tool, as a util tool, to be able to not only improve their writing, but to improve their self-expression in a large variety of situations. Because note, people didn't just use generative AI to write scripts or to write plays. They use these things to do things like produce emails, to do things like producing human responses in like a social interaction, for example. There are individuals that use these things as references to be able to better express themselves as human beings. This was something that you weighed very high.
OG.
Generative AI is a tool that people use to improve their writing, to improve their expression, especially minority and neuroatypical individuals that had experiences that they wanted to meaningfully express but couldn't do so because of the structure barriers they face. I'll take opening.
Yeah, your premise is that AI is assistive and can be harnessed. We say that they are superior when they create the actual work that you're doing. We think that you are very able to opt into training and like getting better because writing is just something that humans are naturally do. We just make art. You guys can't do that on your side.
All the structural barriers I explained as to why people can't meaningfully express themselves just respond to this fairly conclusively. But also, people don't just use ChatGPT in a way that replaces their work. People use these things in a multitude of other scenarios that they just don't engage with in a POI. Why do you weigh this above every house in this debate? First, people just have the intrinsic right to self-expression. People want to be able to do things like fully express the highs and lows of human conditions and the experiences that they go through on a daily basis. Unfortunately, people don't have access to these things under bench. Obviously, this becomes far better on an opening. People have a right to access and improve a tool that's util towards these individuals. The second thing it does is it flips a lot of opening government's claims about forcing people out of your passions because they massively expand the scale to which individuals can meaningfully express themselves, because it's not just writers now. It's an average person that can use these tools online to be able to better express themselves. Obviously, if people cared about these things as their passion, people cared about doing these things outside of a job, you massively expanded this under the side of closing opposition. But even if this was the case, the minority that they're talking about and the minority that GovBench talks about are those that were particularly privileged, individuals that had access to training. Obviously, we weigh those that didn't have these things. We weigh the largest majority of individuals in the ground whose lives are massively improved by letting them express themselves in a way that was more meaningful. Vote 0.
I'd like to thank the member of opposition for the speech, calling on the government to appear here.
Hello, just let me collect my notes real quick. Also, am I audible? Please do flag out if I'm inaudible when in my speech.
You're audible.
Okay, thank you. I will accept POIs verbally. I will not be looking at chat. Just give me a moment. Okay. My pronouns are she, her, and I will be starting my speech. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So basically, based on what I got from today's debate, opposition is okay with trading off originality for just something that is produced by a machine. Now, before I get into like reinstating our case for today, let me just jump into my responses real quick, right? Mainly tackling the whole thing on OO's case. Now, OO's main contention was how people will take ideas and inspirations from other things around them anyways. Hence, ChatGPT or whatever, like this AI thing is not any different. The difference here between inspiration from seeing something with your own eyes and experiences and a robot giving you an entire script that is generated by using a lot of intellectual property of other people is obviously quite inherent, right? Because on one side, one thing is that you create from your own blood, sweat, and tears, from your own experiences and from people on the ground zero, compared to something that was just handed to you on a silver platter, right? Clearly, this is the difference on like the whole thing that OO is just trying, for some reason, conveniently trying to ignore. Now, they also said how like the power of computers are incredibly strong. And yeah, we agree. So since they're all so powerful, where is the job security for these writers anyways? Because on your side, there's no certainty, right? And one more thing that they mentioned is how, oh, this AI generation thing is really good because artists and writers in general aren't immortal and AI recreates us and this is so good. But the thing is, you can never perfectly recreate someone's work, and by doing this, you're removing the emotional aspect of the person and their work, which you don't cherish. Hence, you just don't cherish it anymore, right? Because the human emotion is something that is extremely important, especially in a work of art, and AI removes that important connotation, right? Because the whole important thing of what makes something so meaningful and why you opt into this in the first place, and why you think that Stephen King is such a great author in the first place, is because you have a human connection to him. No, thank you. I'll take you later. Now, another thing that they mentioned is how current artists will get more competition now, which is great. But they're completely just missing the whole point in their entire case with today, right? On the whole government side bench. Because competition is no longer like between like, oh, regular writers versus writers. It's a literal AI now, a constantly developing machine that's already been framed out by Divya and can spew anything in real time. The playing field is no longer leveled. It's honestly unfair to put them against like a generative AI model. But before that, I'll take your POI.
Our case wasn't that you would replace commercial work with AI-generated work. It was that we empowered the average person in self-expression and expressing the human emotion that you value so much on Closing Cup. How is this not the most certain benefit?
The thing is, right, you said that you want to use AI to empower your human connection, but if your human connection is contingent on the fact that you have to use AI in the first place, it's not really that human to begin with, isn't it? Now, let me continue on my rebuttals. Now, another thing that they also mentioned is like the whole point of the strike anyways was completely disregarded by the entire both benches of side opposition. The whole point of the strike was to create awareness and a protest against AI because they were taking away their job opportunities in the first place, right? OO didn't even take into account of the literal livelihood of writers in general, whereas DBS already told you how this will lead to less job opportunities. Hence, because why? Because you'll be so easily replaced, right? Because now you're gonna be putting up writers to compete against AI, which is exactly their premise, which is why it's a really bad thing. This is exactly what causes poor job security in the first place, hence the whole reason for the strike as well. If someday AI can generate like a piece of work that is better than like whatever these like original thoughts that these writers had in the first place, then you're screwed, right? You have absolutely no avenue for you to be like, hey, I'm actually better than this piece of AI. I'm actually a lot better. I'm more unique. You can't have that anymore. It's not on your side, but we take it on our side as well. Now, I think that one other thing that OO mentioned, which I found to be quite problematic, is how they said like, oh, you're gonna be synthesizing information, therefore plagiarism is not applicable. But the thing is that DVS and literally the entire government bench I've been harping to you since just now is the fact that this tool always starts off as a tool first, right? Then it progresses into like creating its own. And even if we buy into the fact that there is no plagiarism and for some reason they'll just be synthesizing information based on like, whatever it is that the AI is doing, it's just as harmful to your side because you'd be replacing these writers with these AI models, and the barriers to entry for new and starting writers will be starved for new content and will just fall off, right? Now we say that even if AI is able to replicate the human emotions, what society cares about is the fact that an actual human person wrote that work. Otherwise, we don't feel like you can even relate to it, and that ruins the experience for us in general, right? My member already harped on this extensively that has just been ignored entirely by our bench. Now, another thing how they mentioned is on compensation, which honestly I find to be quite contradictory to themselves because first they said like, oh, it's not plagiarism. Then they come in and say, oh, original writers will be compensated in terms of royals or whatever. But the thing is, they just said that how plagiarism wouldn't occur in the first place. If that's so, why the need to compensate the original writers if the AI didn't plagiarize it in the first place, right? It doesn't make sense. It's honestly contradictory. Please clarify. Now, another thing on how they mentioned is like how, oh, there's pressure to make art better. Honestly, this is very unlikely to even see new writers up and coming because what's the whole point now, right? Your credentials don't even matter anymore if your entire idea is no longer unique because some AI generated it faster and quicker than you could ever do it when you put on your resume, right? So honestly, it's also very unlikely that to see any job incentives on your side, which is a burden that we've been trying to push onto you since the very beginning that has not been engaged in at all. Now, also, you don't even protect your stakeholders, which is you're already fragile writers, but we do this perfectly. Now, one more thing I like to talk about, which is in terms of whatever it is that CO said. Now, CO and honestly the entire opposition bench is debating in the short run when we tell you to look in the long run as well, right? Now, they're saying that your AI can't generate human emotions, but like what side up already says AI is in fact powerful and intelligent, something that both sides have conceded to and agreed to, right? It can learn with training as contextualized in the motion itself, training, right? So even okay, but let's debate in an even if. So even if you can't right now, it creates an avenue for dependency, which is what Divya has already been harping on the entire time. Ops will have less natural creativity, which honestly, no thank you, which honestly just starves the entire the new industry of trying to like create more and more original work in the first place, right? Now, the whole thing on how like they were saying, oh no, you know what? It's okay for them to use like these sort of AI generative tools because writers' names will still be shown in the end credit scene. That's okay. The thing is, as Diva's already told you, it is the behind the scenes that is no longer emotional and impactful, right? Because honestly, if everyone is just like, oh, I'm just using AI, I'm just using AI, you take out that humanity, the humanity aspect that everyone just so that clearly desires in this current day and age, right? Because it's going to be devoid of humanity and the human process of doing so. People will see that you got the idea from an AI and use that tool to create something, and hence remove the originality that makes screenplays so good in the first place, right? Now, I kind of find it funny that they use Industrial Revolution as an example on how farmers are unhappy, but now you get like benefit to society. Farmers are still unhappy because they got replaced by machines in the first place, right? Please engage on this. Now, one of the things is like, oh, people don't just use AI to write their own work. But then they agree that right now people use AI to create works that they can claim as their own without checks and balances in the first place. But we already tell you why opposition are in the first place. Let me tell you why we weigh out against our OG. Now, on three very simple things. We tell you that diversity in content create dependency, loss of jobs, credibility, no accountability whatsoever. We protect humans' humanity, side with CG.
Thank you for that speech, Governor Whip. Following on the opposition whip to end this debate. Here.
Cool. Am I visible and audible?
Yep.
I'm going to start this speech with a simple question. What is the purpose of art? Because OG, CG, and OO spent the whole time talking about how this debate changes the benefits for writers themselves, on writers' salaries, on their benefits, on the counterfactual of better agreements, stuff like this. A lot of problems with this analysis, though. First of all, most writers are not unionized and exist in the deals that OO and OG fight over. Most writers are freelancers that exist in other parts of the sector. But secondly, as Marcus explains, writers are able to write and express themselves on both sides of the house. I'm an English major. I take a creative writing class at uni currently. I have unique tools, training, and privilege to express myself as a writer and have a career as a writer. The key difference that we prove on CO is that generative AI is available to everyone with a Wi-Fi connection or with a computer. It's not just about writers or companies using this technology. It's about individuals who can't fully express themselves and write stories, who can now input this into ChatGPT and express those stories. Because as OG greatly concede to us, every person is a writer. Everyone wants to have a dream of expressing themselves. Everyone deserves all the stuff that OG wants to give you on passion. Everyone deserves that, right? That's what we prove on CO. Because maybe OG proving their best case that the privileged writers on their side of the house have less money, have less tools. We don't care. We simply outweigh them. Our claim is simple. Writers are one of the most privileged groups in society. They don't have to work a blue-collar job. They're often very wealthy. They live in very westernized countries often. We should care about everyday people who now do not have access to expression, who get it. But also, I think as OO points out, powerful writers who still have protection against plagiarism and stuff like that. And the example I want to use here is on the printing press. Because before the printing press, only some people were able to read. Now, they read better than others. They interpreted the Bible better than other people. That was an ability difference. But we explained that when the printing press was released, everyone was able to read. Everyone got the privilege of reading for themselves, coming with their own ideas, and then having their own views based on those ideas. That is what we get on side opposition in this debate uniquely. On their side, the writers who write better art, who write better stories, maybe do it better on their side. On our side, we get everyone who has the base access to expression. Because the comparative is, while yes, AI still exists on their side of the house, the data set changes. They use the internet, Wikipedia, and social media to write stories. We give them Shakespeare, we give them Milton, we give them Wilfred Owen, we give them Chichen Anombe, and plenty of other writers from diverse backgrounds and experiences, all at your fingertips. You don't need to go to university, you don't need to go to an English class, you don't have to have good language skills, you don't have to have any issues with neurodivergencies and be neurodivergent. It's on our side of the house. This must outweigh all of opening half and CG's benefits to writers. They do not matter much in this debate. I'll take a point from opening at this point.
Neuroatypicals and other people can still use AI to write emails or whatever. The delta is that we protect writers. Why can't those people use AI in your world to write emails anyway?
I just explained where the data set changes. Yes, now in our world, ChatGPT draws from Instagram and Wikipedia. That does not, as Marcus explained, be able to express human emotion, express human stories. We're saying that when you increase the data set to include these great works, include best writers' works that you consider are very, very strong, we get that benefit. Okay, now on to other claims we get from closing government. First, on people deserving this inherently as writers. As Marcus already explains, you don't have an inherent right to a job, like very, very unclear. Plenty of industries have risen and fallen in history as technology has changed, like looms, as Marcus explains. Unclear why you have a right to have this job forever. But also, I point out that writers exist in a social contract, right? Like IP laws and copyright laws exist as an agreement. Society agrees there's an incentive to create and write more.
POICG.
You have these laws in place and writers agree to produce that work under that system. But we explain that when the comparative changes, when we can give out people this benefit to everyone, that social contract breaks down, and so we should break it. People who have privilege should not have an inherent right to be able to express and hold on to ideas. And other thing I'm going to give here is that writers obviously also take inspiration. Like, again, I do creative writing class. Half our time is spent reading other people's great works and discussing what the style is, how we can replicate it, what we can use from it. Obviously, great writers do this all the time. Why should we not be able to do it as well? Incredibly unclear. Next claim on authenticity. They say, oh, well, this is going to be authentic writer. No, thank you. But first of all, if we replicate the data set and include great writers, we get more authentic writing. Like as O points out, AI is still going to exist on both sides of the house, but on their side, AI is not as authentic. It doesn't have this increased data set. Authenticity is worse on their side. But also we point out that I just will defeat the premise. Like obviously things that are not human can be beautiful. The stars are beautiful. Computer code is beautiful to some people. Obviously things that are not beautiful are just because they're created by human beings. They can be beautiful inherently. But also we'd point out that this work is original. Like he's just like, oh, it's all created by an AI. That's not our scenario. Let me show you what this looks like. If a person with dyslexia observes the world around them, like CG says, puts it into ChatGPT, they can use the tool to better express themselves. It is still original. It is still true to your experience. It is still authentic. Our case was very, very simple in this debate. Writers, we don't care about writers in the corporate sphere. We don't care about corporations. We care about everyday people who must be the one that we hire in this debate, must outweigh on writers' benefits, pay, must outweigh on authenticity or some desire to keep a job. Clear, CO win.
All right, I'd like to thank everybody for the debate. It's a really good round. Congratulate all of you for making it this far. May I invite the panels, or wait,